At 7:46 a.m., I sat at my small kitchen table in New York City, reading the message that would split my world in half. My family, the same people I held through storms and sickness, had typed 12 cold words telling me to disappear from their lives. No warning, no reason, just distance. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't break. I felt something sharper than sadness settle inside me. They thought cutting me off would end the story. They were wrong. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, like this video and tell me where you're watching from. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten breakfast at for more than 40 years, when my phone buzzed. It was early, still quiet, the sun barely touching the curtains. I didn't expect anything dramatic. I thought maybe it was one of the grandkids sending a good morning message or asking for a recipe. Instead, I saw a long group text from my daughter, my son-in-law, and even 2 of the teenage grandchildren. The moment my eyes landed on the words, it felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely. That exact line. No greeting, no explanation, no warmth, just a blunt dismissal sent through a tiny screen. I stared at it, reading it again and again, trying to understand whether this was a joke, a mistake, or some kind of misunderstanding that could be cleared with one phone call. But the more I read, the clearer it became. They were serious. They wanted me gone from their lives, just like that, with one message. My hands started to shake, not from weakness, but from the shock of how easily they decided I was disposable. I kept thinking of the family dinners I hosted, the birthdays I organized, the money I sent when they said they were tight, the doctor appointments I drove them to, the nights I babysat when they needed help, the holidays I paid for, the times I stood by them when they made mistakes they never admitted. All of that wiped out by 4 simple sentences typed in a group chat. It felt like someone had taken a knife and drawn it straight across the memories of my entire life. My mind went straight to every small act of love I had given them, meals cooked, gifts wrapped, blankets folded for sleepovers, and it all hit me like a cold wave. None of it mattered to them, not enough to deserve a phone call, not enough to deserve a goodbye, not even enough to deserve an explanation. The silence in the house got heavier. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, and the tiny clicking sound my phone made when another message appeared. This time it wasn't a new text, just the old one reopening because my thumb shook over the screen. I looked at every name in that group chat and wondered how they convinced themselves this was right, how they gathered together to type something so cruel. They didn't even bother to send messages separately. They grouped together, like I was the enemy, like I might argue or scream or beg. They didn't know me at all if that's what they expected. The words sank deeper and deeper into my chest, leaving a sharp ache I didn't know how to name. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't planning anything. I was simply stunned in a way that made it hard to breathe. I kept thinking, after everything I've done, this is how they speak to me? But no matter how many times I asked that in my head, the answer always came back the same. Yes, this was what they wanted. My first instinct wasn't to reply. I didn't want to beg anyone to keep me in their life. I didn't want to ask for reasons or explanations or excuses that would only cause more pain. Instead, I sat there, letting the coldness of the message settle. I felt a strange numbness spreading through me, but underneath that numbness was something else, something harder, sharper, waiting to surface. I could sense it rising slowly, like a tide that had been pulled back for years and was finally ready to come crashing in. They thought this text would break me. They thought I would crumble, fall silent, disappear exactly as they requested. But as I sat there, reading the words again, I realized something important. People don't send messages like that unless they are hiding something, unless they are afraid of something, unless they feel cornered by something they don't want exposed. And suddenly, the shock turned into something clearer, understanding. There was a reason behind this text, something deeper than simple distance. They didn't want distance. They wanted silence. And that was the moment everything shifted inside me. The heartbreak stayed, but it settled into a quiet corner. Something else took its place, a calm, steady awareness. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what I had in my files, in my emails, in my safe deposit box. They didn't know what I had found over the years while cleaning up after their mistakes. And they didn't know how far I would go to protect myself when someone tried to erase me. They thought the message was the end. But for me, it was the beginning. I stood in my living room holding the phone, reading the message again and again. It felt strange how a few short words could cut deeper than any long speech. My family had sent a group text telling me they needed distance from me and that I should stop contacting them completely. It was clear, cold, and without even a hint of emotion. For a moment, my chest felt tight, like the room had lost all its air. I expected myself to cry or break down, but I did nothing. Instead, I stood very still, letting the silence grow around me. I knew if I reacted too fast, I would lose control of my thoughts. So I waited. I let the shock wash over me slowly, because I knew that sometimes pain hurts less when you take it in small waves. My phone buzzed again. A second message came from one of the grandkids, short, blunt, not even a full sentence. It confirmed they had all talked among themselves before they sent the message. This was not a slip of emotion or a sudden reaction. This was planned. They had made a choice together. The feeling of betrayal was heavy, but instead of sinking, something inside me lifted. I stood up straighter. I could feel my back lengthen and my shoulders relax, as if my body knew how to protect me even when my heart was confused. I walked to the kitchen table, placed the phone down, and looked out the window. It was early morning. The sun was rising, and the light coming in made everything look softer, even the pain. I thought about how easy it would be to call one of them and demand an explanation, but I also knew what would happen. They would turn the blame on me. They always did. It would become a long cycle of excuses, guilt, and manipulation. I had spent years giving them more chances than they deserved. So I did not call. I did not reply. The silence between us became my first act of calm rebellion. My stillness was stronger than any argument I could make, and as the minutes passed, a small smile appeared on my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of knowing, a quiet smile that comes when a person realizes something important, when you finally see the truth about people you love, even when that truth hurts. I sat down and held the phone again. I could see the entire conversation like a long hallway closing behind me. Their words, sharp and final, were like a door slamming shut. But the moment the door closed, something else opened inside me. Distance from people who hurt you is not always a loss. Sometimes it is a gift you never asked for, but needed more than anything. I breathed slowly and deeply, realizing that their decision to remove me from their lives was also freeing me from their judgment, their demands, and their constant lack of appreciation. They thought they were pushing me down, but they were actually lifting a weight off my shoulders. The smile on my face stayed because I knew something they didn't. I knew about the financial accounts they depended on. I knew about the documents they never asked about, but trusted I handled. I knew about the arrangements they assumed would always benefit them. They had no idea how much of their stability came from me. They had no idea how many of their bills, emergencies, and comforts had been supported quietly by my sacrifices. I had all the proof. They thought they were dismissing me like I was a burden, but they were pushing away the very person who had been holding their lives together in ways they never bothered to notice. As I sat there in the soft morning light, looking down at the harsh message on my screen, something inside me shifted. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was clarity. I saw my family for who they had become, People who were happy to take from me, but too proud to respect me. People who believed distance would punish me, not knowing distance was exactly what I needed to breathe again. I picked up the phone one last time, not to reply to them, but to save the message. Proof, evidence, a marker of the moment they decided I was no longer part of their lives. I saved it because something told me they would regret this decision one day. I saved it because I knew there would come a time when they would rewrite the story to make themselves look innocent. I saved it because truth matters more when people try to twist it later. Then I placed the phone down, folded my hands, and let the calm settle into me. The message that was meant to break me had done the opposite. It had shown me exactly who they were and reminded me exactly who I was. A woman who had survived more than this. A mother who had given more than they deserved. A grandmother who still had strength left in her, even if they chose not to see it. And as the sun rose higher outside my window, I whispered to myself without any fear, this was not the end. This was the beginning of the truth. When I think back on everything that led to that group text, it is never one moment. It is a long line of quiet hurt that stretched across years, each event small enough for them to dismiss, but heavy enough for me to never forget. It began with the first time I noticed I was being left out of simple things. A birthday dinner they never told me about, a school event for my grandson that I only learned of through a neighbor, a family photo they posted online without me even being invited. At first, I thought I was overthinking, because mothers and grandmothers like me always try to give our children the benefit of the doubt. We excuse, we forgive, we downplay. But each time they brushed me aside, it cut deeper than they ever understood. There were days when I would cook dinner, waiting for a call that never came, only to find out later they all went out together. They never said they didn't want me there, but their silence was louder than any words. I started noticing how they talked to me, short answers, tired sighs, like my presence drained them. I tried harder to be useful. I offered to babysit, even when my back hurt. I helped with bills when they struggled. I drove across town when they needed last-minute help. I stayed quiet when they snapped at me because I believed families should hold each other up, not push each other away. But they never saw any of that. They only saw someone who was convenient, someone they could call when they needed something, someone they didn't think twice about excluding once their needs were met. The real shift began when I started asking small questions. Nothing dramatic, just trying to understand why they were growing so distant. But even gentle questions caused irritation. They rolled their eyes, they whispered to each other. They left the room when I entered. I remember sitting on my couch after one visit, staring at the door they had just walked out of, wondering when they stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as a burden. I tried to talk to them, but conversations were always rushed. They said they were busy. They said I worried too much. They said I was too sensitive. They never stopped to think that maybe I felt all this distance because they created it. For years, I tried to fix things. I sent long messages, trying to explain how I felt. Some were ignored. Some were read but never answered. Sometimes I would get a short response meant to shut me down. I tried visiting without warning, hoping a face-to-face moment would make things better, but they treated me like I had interrupted something important. And the worst part was that I kept blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, what I could have done better, why my own family seemed happier without me. The deeper truth came out slowly, in small cracks. A comment from my granddaughter about things her parents said about me. A slip of the tongue from my son during a holiday argument. A neighbor mentioning something she overheard at the grocery store. That is when I learned they had been painting me as controlling, dramatic, and too involved. All because I had asked basic questions, offered help, or tried to stay involved in their lives. They created a picture of me that didn't match the woman I knew I was. They didn't want my presence because they didn't want to be accountable for their own behavior. It was easier for them to make me the problem. There were also financial things they never acknowledged. I paid for car repairs they forgot to pay back. I loaned money they promised to return, but never did. I covered school supplies, groceries, medical bills, not because I wanted control, but because I loved them. Yet somehow, they twisted my support into accusations that I was too involved or trying to interfere. They didn't want my help, but they also didn't want to refuse it. They wanted the benefits without the responsibility of treating me with respect. Looking back, I realized they had been pulling away for years, testing how far they could push me, how much I would tolerate, how little effort they could put into our relationship while still expecting me to be available whenever they needed something. They expected unconditional loyalty from me while offering none in return. I became the person they only reached out to when they needed a favor, money, or a babysitter, never when they wanted to share joy, celebration, or simple family moments. So when that group text finally arrived, cold and blunt, telling me they needed distance and wanted me to stop contacting them completely, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to realize fully before. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. This was the final step in a path they had been walking for years. That message was just the first time they had the courage to say out loud what they had been showing me through their actions all along. I often think back to the small things, the signs I ignored because I believed family would never turn truly cold. Those little moments seemed harmless at first, but each one chipped at me until the pieces finally made sense. It did not start with the big text that told me to stop contacting them. It started many months before that, with tiny patterns that grew into silent walls. I remember birthdays where no one called until late at night, as if I were the last person on their list. I remember holidays where they sent short messages instead of inviting me over, saying they were too busy, even while posting pictures of celebrations online. I told myself they were tired or stressed or just not thinking, but now I know these signs were warnings of something much deeper. There were moments when I offered help, and they brushed me off like I was a stranger trying to interfere. I had always been the one they came to when they needed something: money for bills, babysitting, groceries, medical help. But suddenly, they acted as if my presence was inconvenient. I would bring food, and they would leave it on the counter without saying thank you. I would ask about their day, and they would answer with short, empty words that felt like doors closing. The distance was growing, but I kept hoping it was temporary. I did not want to think my own blood could ever treat me like something disposable. More signs appeared as time passed. They planned family trips without even telling me they were going. I would see photos of them at restaurants, beaches, birthday parties, all smiling together as if I did not exist. When I asked gently why I was not invited, they would say it was last minute or only for a few people. But every excuse felt like a cold stone added to my heart. I started to understand that I was no longer part of their circle. I was being slowly pushed out. They wanted distance long before they said it in words. There were also messages that went unanswered, left unread for days, sometimes weeks. When they needed something, they responded quickly, but when I wanted simple connection, they disappeared. It was always one-sided. I was the one who reached out, who checked in, who offered support. I was the one who remembered important dates, kept track of their needs, and made sure they had help. But no one checked on me. Not once. Not even when I went through difficult times. I started noticing that the love I gave did not return to me. It went into a void. Finances became another sign. They stopped asking politely and started assuming. They expected me to cover certain expenses without even discussing it. They acted as if my money was community property. If I hesitated, they became cold or distant. Once, I asked a simple question about how money was being spent, and they reacted as if I had no right to ask. Later, I found out certain bills I thought were paid were actually overdue. My name had been used without my knowledge on things I never agreed to. It was a slow betrayal, quiet and hidden, but dangerous. They were taking advantage of me long before they sent that final message. Holidays became the biggest sign. There were times when I arrived at gatherings and felt like an outsider standing in my own family. They whispered among themselves, exchanged looks, and walked away when I approached. They spoke about plans and memories as if I were not standing right there. I sensed something shifting, something breaking, but I did not want to believe it. I kept hoping things would return to normal, that they just needed time or space. But each gathering showed less warmth than the last. I began to feel like they were waiting for an excuse to cut me off completely. Even the grandchildren started acting differently. They avoided speaking to me directly, looked at their parents before answering my questions, and sometimes ignored me entirely. I could see that someone had been talking about me when I was not around, creating a picture of me that was not real. The shift did not come from the children. It came from the adults who raised them. A quiet campaign was happening behind my back, one that I could not fully see but could feel every day. And then came the final sign, the group messages where I was accidentally excluded. They created new chats without me, made plans privately, and left me out of important decisions that affected the entire family. When I asked questions, they acted confused, pretending it was a mistake. But mistakes do not happen every single time. Patterns are not accidents. They are choices. And these choices were made long before they finally sent that text telling me they needed distance from me. Looking back now, the clues were everywhere. Small cuts, small silences, small exclusions that built into a wall I never thought I'd face. I was being pushed out of my own family step by step. And that text, cold and final, was only the last piece of a betrayal that had been building for far too long. When I read that message for the 10th time, I finally understood the truth they had been hiding behind polite smiles and half-hearted hugs for years. It was not written in anger. It was not written in a moment of frustration. It was written with intention. It was written with a cold heart. It was written with the plan to remove me from their lives completely. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling the same dull ache I used to feel after long days when no one in the house thanked me for the meals, the laundry, or the nights I stayed up with sick children. The words on the screen were only the final blow, not the first. I read them again, letting each one sink into the quiet space around me. They wanted distance. They wanted silence. They wanted me gone as if I had never existed. And the thought hit me harder than anything I had faced in my entire life. I thought about every birthday I hosted, the cakes I baked with careful hands, the gifts I gave even when money was tight. I remembered the nights I stayed awake waiting for them to reach home safely, the times I checked on them when they were sick, the moments I defended them when others judged. None of that mattered now. They wanted distance. I felt an emptiness forming, not because I lost them, but because I finally saw how little they valued what I had given. I felt the kind of pain that is not loud, not dramatic, not explosive. It was silent, steady, and deep. It spread slowly, taking over every part of me. I put the phone down on the table and just stared at it. The light from the screen kept flashing because more messages came in from them. Short ones. Cold ones. They made the intent clearer with every word. They were drawing a line, and I was on the outside of it. I felt something inside me shift. For years, I had taken the blame, softened the arguments, apologized even when I was right. I had carried the weight of the family on my shoulders, thinking that if I stopped, everything would collapse. But now I saw the truth. They had been building a life where I was only needed when they wanted favors, when they wanted money, when they wanted someone to clean, cook, or care for the grandchildren while they enjoyed their lives. But when they no longer needed any of that, they pushed me aside without hesitation. The betrayal grew sharper the more I thought about it. I remembered the last family dinner, how quiet they were toward me, how they whispered among themselves. I remembered holidays when they barely noticed I was there. I started realizing there were many moments when they treated me as an outsider, but I ignored it because I believed family always came back together. But seeing those words now, written by the people I raised, the people I protected, the people I fought for, made me understand how wrong I was. My hands were steady now. The shock was fading, and something else was emerging, a strange calm that came from seeing the truth without emotion clouding it. I began to see patterns, decisions, and behavior that made sense only now. They were not pushing me away because of something I did. They were pushing me away because I no longer served a purpose in the roles they built for me. They did not want a mother, they wanted a tool, and when the tool was no longer convenient, they threw it aside. I took a slow breath and let everything settle. The betrayal hurt, but the clarity felt powerful. Their cruelty was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of theirs. And in that moment, the pain slowly turned into something sharper, something cleaner, something that allowed me to think clearly. I realized I did not need to beg for answers. I did not need to convince them of my value. I did not need to chase people who did not want to stay. I only needed to understand their message for what it truly was, a sign that they were willing to lose me completely. And if that was their choice, then I would accept it. But I would not walk away empty, powerless, or erased. That was the moment I promised myself that the next steps would not be taken in sadness or fear, but with careful thought, quiet strength, and a plan they would never see coming. I sat alone that evening, holding the phone that had delivered the cold message from my family. The words were short, but the impact kept echoing. They wanted distance from me. They wanted silence. They wanted me gone from every part of their lives. After many years of giving my time, money, and support, I was now treated as if I had never belonged to them at all. I felt the heaviness move through my chest, not quickly, but slowly, the way a bruise spreads under the skin. I knew crying would not change anything, so I did what I had always done in hard moments. I sat, breathed, and thought carefully. By the time the room grew darker, something inside me shifted. If they wanted distance, I could accept that. But before I released myself completely, I needed to know the truth behind their sudden unity against me. I walked into the small room where I kept my documents and family records. I had always been the one who managed everything because no one else bothered to learn. I opened the metal box at the bottom of the shelf, a box I had not touched in years. It held old bank papers, tax records, insurance forms, and files from when I helped each of them during their hard times. I kept everything because I believed families should be responsible, and I believed one day they might need these records. Now, it looked like I was the only one who needed them. The first file I opened was for my oldest son. Years ago, he had asked for money to save his small business. I remembered working overtime to help him. When the business recovered, he slowly forgot the debt. I discovered in the papers that he had listed me as a guarantor on several accounts. He had removed me later, but not before placing me under financial risk without telling me. I sat back in the chair, realizing he had quietly used me more than once. The next folder was my daughter's. She had always said she handled her finances well, but inside her file were receipts I had paid during her early years: rent, car repairs, a loan she promised to return. I found a copy of a document she had asked me to sign long ago. I read it slowly and realized it gave her limited access to one of my savings accounts. She had used it once, taken more than she admitted, and never told me. It wasn't a small mistake. It was a choice she had made, hoping I would never notice. My hands tightened around the paper, but I stayed calm. What they had done was not new. What was new was how clearly I now saw it. Then I opened the file of my youngest son. He had always acted kind, the one who checked on me the most. For a moment, I thought maybe he wasn't part of the message that asked for distance. But when I read through his records, I found things I hadn't expected at all. He had used my name to apply for a family discount on a loan. He had claimed I lived with him to get benefits. He had signed documents stating I was financially dependent on him. None of it was true. He had lied on paper because he believed I would never look. My heart didn't break. Instead, it felt like it hardened into something steadier and heavier. When I finished going through the files, I suddenly understood why they wanted distance. It wasn't because they were angry with me. It was because they were afraid I would discover the things they had been hiding for years. They didn't want distance. They wanted protection from the truth, from responsibility, from the consequences they never imagined I would bring forward. They had pushed me away to protect themselves. I gathered the papers into neat piles. I scanned each one and saved them into a folder on my computer with the label, Family Records, Final. I uploaded copies to an external drive, one I knew only I had access to. As I worked, my hands stayed steady. There was no anger in me, only clarity. The truth was in front of me in black and white. My years of patience had given me something stronger than revenge, evidence. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but I knew I had stepped out of the fog they had built around me. When I finished organizing everything, I closed the metal box and locked it again. This time, I felt no sadness doing it. I felt prepared. My family had asked for distance, and I would give it to them, but not in the way they imagined. I now understood every lie, every hidden number, every form they thought I'd never see. I realized that I was the one holding the truth, and they were the ones who should be afraid of what came next. I stood up, leaving the papers in order, and felt something new inside me, strength after silence. I did not waste time after seeing everything clearly. The text from my family told me they wanted distance, but the evidence on my table told me they were also hiding things that involved my name, my money, and the years of work I had put into building the life they now enjoyed. I knew I could not face this alone. I needed someone who understood the law, the numbers, the small details that families often think they can bury under excuses and silence. So I picked up my phone and made the call I had been avoiding for months. I contacted the lawyer who had once helped me organize my retirement plans, a man who knew how much I had put aside and how careful I had been. He answered quickly, and the moment I explained the situation, he told me to gather everything I had found. He said the signs were serious, and he wanted to see every document before advising me. His calm tone gave me a sense of control I had not felt in a long time. I opened my old file cabinet and pulled out folders I had not touched in years. Some were thick with receipts, bank letters, and insurance details. Others held medical bills I had paid for my children, school fees, emergency transfers, and loan papers where I had co-signed to help them. The more I spread everything across the dining table, the more I realized how much of my life I had poured into that family. They wanted distance now, but they had never wanted distance when they needed money, support, or comfort. I kept sorting the documents until I created groups, one for shared expenses, one for money I had given freely, one for money I had loaned but never seen again, and one for the hidden accounts I had discovered. Each stack told a story of trust that had been broken long before they sent that cold message. My lawyer asked me to meet him the next morning, but I stayed awake organizing everything until the sun came up. I wanted each folder to be clear, labeled, and impossible to deny. I knew my family had grown comfortable with the idea that I would never question them. They believed my silence was weakness. They thought my age made me slow, easy to manipulate, easy to ignore. But I felt stronger with every piece of paper I placed on the table. I felt a sense of purpose return. I understood now that this situation was not just about the text message. It was about years of small betrayals that had built up, unnoticed, until they finally exploded into a demand that I erase myself from their lives. The next day, I drove to the lawyer's office with the boxes of documents. He sat with me for hours, reviewing every detail, asking questions, connecting dots, highlighting patterns. With each page he examined, his face grew more serious. He told me that what my family had done was not simply rude or emotional. It was strategic. It involved financial decisions that required my signature or approval, yet they had gone ahead without telling me. Some accounts had my name on them, even though I had never touched them. Money had moved in ways that suggested I was being slowly pushed aside, both emotionally and legally. That message, asking for distance, now looked like the final step in a plan to separate me from the financial rights I still held. He explained the options. I could file a legal claim to protect my financial interests. I could freeze the accounts they were trying to control. I could demand a full audit of every transaction involving my name, and if necessary, I could take them to court. He told me not to feel guilty. He said this was not about revenge, but about protecting the life I had worked for. He reminded me that choosing myself did not make me cruel. It made me smart. It made me strong. It made me responsible for my own future. Leaving his office, I felt a calm sense of direction. The fear I had felt when I first read the message was gone. The sadness still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. I now had power, knowledge, and a plan. My family wanted distance, but they had no idea what that distance would cost them. I understood now that real strength came from facing the truth, even when it hurt. And with every step I took toward reclaiming my dignity, I felt the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. I arranged the meeting in a quiet community room at the local library, a place where no one could shout, storm out, or pretend they didn't hear the truth. I chose that room for a reason. It was neutral, silent, and public enough that no one could accuse me of causing drama. When they walked in, my oldest son first, then my daughter, then the two grandchildren who could barely look me in the eyes, I could see the same confidence they had when they sent that text message. They thought this meeting was going to be me begging, apologizing, or pleading for a place in their lives. They thought I'd be small, wounded, emotional, needy. But I sat straight, calm, and steady, with a folder in front of me. I didn't look angry. I didn't look sad. I looked finished, and that alone unsettled them more than any words could. My daughter spoke first, using that controlled tone she reserves for people she thinks are beneath her. She said this meeting was a courtesy, that they had nothing more to discuss. My son nodded like he was her echo. The grandchildren fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable, but they didn't say a word. They expected me to crumble, to explain why I deserved their distance, to take responsibility for things that weren't mine. They were ready to walk out after delivering a few cold sentences. They didn't realize they weren't the ones in control anymore. For the first time in years, the power wasn't theirs. It was mine. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of paper sliding fill the room. My son's eyes dropped to the documents, as if he recognized something he hoped I'd never see. My daughter froze, her confidence cracking like thin glass. I placed the papers between us, printed statements, screenshots, emails, bank logs, every secret they thought I didn't know, every account they thought I couldn't access, every withdrawal they made from money they assumed I wasn't paying attention to. It was all there. I didn't lecture them. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pushed the folder forward. Watching their faces twist as they read each page was more powerful than any speech I could have given. My daughter whispered, "Where did you get this?" Her voice shook, the first real crack in her armor. She knew exactly what every page meant. My son tried to play dumb, but his hand was trembling when he reached for the documents. They weren't expecting the truth to stare back at them so plainly. They had spent months, maybe years, thinking I was blind, soft, easy to deceive. They forgot that I was the one who built the foundations they stood on. They forgot that I wasn't stupid. I was patient. When they realized what the folder contained, the misuse of my funds, the hidden accounts in my name, the documents they'd handled without permission, they finally lifted their eyes to me. My son tried to talk first, stumbling over excuses about miscommunication and temporary needs. My daughter blamed stress, then blamed me, then tried sympathy. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them admitted wrongdoing. They weren't sorry. They were scared. Scared of what I could do next. Scared of consequences. Scared that the version of me they'd created in their heads was gone for good. I stayed calm. I didn't yell. I didn't insult them. I didn't feed their drama. I simply laid out the reality. What I knew, what I could prove, and what steps I was prepared to take if they ever tried to push me out of my own life again. I told them boundaries, rights, and protections would now replace the blind trust I used to give. I told them no one would ever send me a text telling me to disappear from my own family again, not without facing the fallout. The grandchildren finally spoke, quietly, asking if everything in the folder was true. I nodded once. They looked stunned, not at me, but at their own parents. That was the first time I saw real shame on their faces. As for my children, they sat still, pale, like people who finally realized the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as they assumed. They couldn't threaten me. They couldn't silence me. They couldn't dismiss me. The moment the truth came out, they had nothing left to use against me. They came into that room thinking they were stronger together, but when they walked out, it was clear who held the real strength, not through revenge or anger, but through truth, preparation, and a quiet power they never expected. I didn't need to shout to make them listen. I didn't need to argue to make them understand. I didn't need to beg to earn space in their lives. I showed them the truth, and the truth did what it always does. It stripped away every lie they were hiding behind. The meeting ended with silence, their silence, not mine. They left without confidence, without certainty, and without the illusion that they could cut me off without consequences. I remained in the room a moment longer, closing the folder gently and taking a deep breath. It wasn't victory I felt. It was clarity. And clarity is stronger than any apology they were never going to give. When the confrontation finally ended, there was a silence in the room I had never heard before. It was not the kind of silence that follows a fight or a misunderstanding. It was a heavy silence, the kind that forms when truth finally stands in the center of the room and no one knows where to look. My family, the same people who had sent that cold text demanding distance, now sat across from me without a single excuse left. Their faces were pale, their eyes unfocused, their hands shaking in their laps. They had walked into the meeting expecting the same old woman they could dismiss, ignore, or push aside. Instead, they were looking at a woman who had uncovered every secret they tried to hide, every financial misstep, every message they thought I never saw, every account they believed I would never find. They thought I would come to beg for forgiveness. They thought I would cry. They thought I would plead for love. I did none of that, and seeing the realization settle over them was the beginning of my quiet victory. My lawyer laid out each document carefully, one by one, explaining how the accounts were tied to my name, how the assets they assumed were theirs were actually still legally under my control, and how every attempt they made to erase me only exposed their own carelessness. I watched their faces while she spoke. My eldest son looked down at the table, tapping his finger nervously. My daughter-in-law bit the inside of her cheek, unable to look at me. My grandchildren avoided my eyes completely, uncomfortable now that the truth had turned the mirror back toward them. The same family that had told me to stop contacting them now had to sit and listen to the consequences of cutting ties with the wrong person. And for the first time in years, I felt no fear. I felt no guilt. I felt no confusion. I felt strength. When the final document was presented, the one that secured my financial position permanently, there was nothing left for them to say. My lawyer asked them if they understood the terms, and each one nodded slowly, almost embarrassed. They had assumed I was weak, but now they realized I had been the only one holding the family together, not just emotionally, but financially. and that truth hit them harder than any punishment the court could give. My silence spoke louder than any speech I could have prepared. It showed them that I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need to beg to be respected. I didn't need to fight to be valued. All I needed was the truth, and the truth was finally on the table for everyone to see. As the meeting came to an end, I stood up slowly, gathering the papers and placing them neatly into my folder. My hands did not shake. My breath did not catch. I did not feel small. I felt whole. For so long, they believed I would always come running back, always accept the bare minimum, always take the scraps of love they offered me. But today, they learned that even the quietest woman can become powerful when pushed too far. Today, they learned that the person they tried to remove from the family was the same person who held everything they depended on. Before I left the room, none of them dared stop me, none dared ask me to stay, none dared repeat the words from that cruel group text. They simply sat there, stunned, each one realizing what they had lost. Not my money, not my support, but my presence. And that was the part that hurt them the most. They finally understood that distance works both ways. If they wanted distance, they now had it. Not out of anger, but out of truth. And truth has a way of ending relationships that were never built on respect to begin with. When I walked out of that building, the air felt different, lighter, clearer. For the first time in a long time, I didn't carry anyone else's weight. I didn't carry guilt. I didn't carry fear. I didn't carry the burden of trying to prove my worth to people who never cared to see it. I carried only myself, and that was enough. I knew that whatever came next, silence, space, rebuilding, or simply starting over, I would face it with strength I had earned through years of being underestimated. And the most satisfying part of all was knowing that they finally saw me for who I truly was, the woman they should never have pushed away. In the weeks after everything unfolded, I found myself sitting alone in the quiet of my living room, thinking about how easily a family can break when truth is ignored for too long. The group text they sent me had been cold, sharp, and final, as if they believed cutting me out would erase their mistakes and leave me powerless. But now, after facing the evidence I presented and seeing the consequences of their actions, they stood on the other side of a line they drew themselves. I didn't chase them. I didn't beg or argue. Instead, I learned to breathe on my own again, without waiting for their approval or affection. That was the first lesson I held close. Sometimes peace begins when you stop asking people to value you. I spent long mornings walking around my neighborhood, letting the calm air settle my mind. I realized how much of my life I had spent worrying about their needs, their opinions, their silence. For years, I softened my voice so they wouldn't feel challenged. I shrank myself to make room for their comfort. When they told me to stay away, it hurt deeply, but it also opened a door I never expected. I finally had space to think about who I was without their constant demands. That space felt strange at first, but slowly it became a place of strength. I filled it with things I enjoyed, small hobbies, short trips, quiet afternoons reading. I rebuilt pieces of myself that had been ignored for years. At first, they didn't contact me. I knew they were embarrassed, confused, and unsure how to fix what they had broken. They expected me to reach out, to patch things up the way I always had. But I didn't. I wanted them to sit with the truth for once, to carry the weight of their own choices. And with every day that passed, I felt a little more grounded, a little more sure that stepping back was not cruelty. It was necessary. There is a kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to convince people to love you the right way. I learned that slowly, one quiet morning at a time. When word spread in the family about what really happened, about the accounts, the hidden decisions, the disrespect, they were forced to face themselves in a way they never expected. People who once avoided my calls suddenly asked questions. Relatives who had always assumed I was the problem now apologized for judging too quickly. I didn't react with anger. I didn't boast or list the years of hurt. I simply listened and nodded, letting them say what they needed to say. Age teaches you that winning doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes winning is just staying steady while the truth speaks for you. Eventually, some family members reached out cautiously, testing the waters, seeing whether I was still angry or bitter. I wasn't. I had boundaries now, clear ones. I didn't open my door to everyone, and I didn't answer every message. I allowed only the people who showed real remorse, not those who wanted to pretend nothing happened. With age comes a sharper sense of who deserves access to your life. I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to carry the burden anymore. I forgave them quietly, but I didn't forget what their distance taught me. My daughter hesitated the longest. The same woman who once told me she needed distance now struggled to find the right words. When she finally spoke to me, her voice was softer than I had heard in years. But instead of rushing in and comforting her like before, I let the silence stretch. She needed to feel the weight of her actions. She needed to understand that a mother's love is strong, but it is not an unlimited well to take from without giving back. Over time, she earned her way back into my life, slowly, respectfully, honestly. That was another lesson. Reconciliation means nothing unless the behavior changes. Through all of this, I learned something I wish I had understood earlier in my life. Family is not defined only by blood, but by who shows up when it matters, who listens, who treats you with dignity. Sometimes the people closest to you can cause the deepest wounds, and sometimes stepping away is the only way to heal. The truth does more than break relationships. It exposes what was fragile to begin with, and once you see things clearly, you cannot pretend anymore. Now, when I look back, I don't feel bitterness. I feel strength. I found my voice in the space they tried to push me into. I found my peace in the silence they forced on me. And I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is distance, from disrespect, from manipulation, from people who only love you when you're convenient. I survived their absence. I grew in it. And today, I choose my own peace above their comfort. That is the true ending of this story, the quiet victory of a woman who finally chose herself.